Cool. So listen, this is the last week of the series, but I'll be honest, I'm not totally sure how to end it. I'm not sure how to tell the story. I'm not sure how to explain it. I'm not sure what I think. I know, by the way, what I want to believe about the story. But see, one of the really hard things, if we can just be self-reflective and we can be self-aware, one of the hard things about being a Christian is, or a person of faith of any kind, is saying like, okay, this is what I believe because I actually genuinely believe it based on evidence and reason and experience and the scriptures and everything else. And this is what I want to believe. Like, those are two totally different things. Like, we were just this morning just talking about Bigfoot. I so badly want to believe in Bigfoot. And I so badly want to believe the crazy stuff. Like, there's people that believe Bigfoot, like, teleports. Teleporting Bigfoot. Like, he's not just a big monkey dude. He is a big monkey dude who can teleport. I want to believe that so much. And I have no reason to, but I want to. And so as Christians, that's a challenge we face, is we have kind of this dichotomy, right, between what we want to believe and what we should believe. And it can be hard to think about like what happens when those things meet, because sometimes what we want to believe is the truth. It's just that sometimes it's not. And so it makes everything tough, particularly when we have something that's a little bit ambiguous like we have in what we're going to talk about. So let's stop beating around the bush and let's just read the story. Last time we talked about the storm. Last time we talked about Jesus walking on water. Here we go. Matthew 14 for the last time. Here's what we read. It says, the disciples were in trouble far away from land, for a strong wind had risen and they were fighting heavy waves. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them, walking on the water. When the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. In their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost." But Jesus spoke to them at once. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Take courage. I'm here." Then Peter called to him and said, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you walking on the water." "Yes, come," Jesus said. So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water towards Jesus. But when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified and he began to sink. "Save me, Lord," he shouted. Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. "You have so little faith," Jesus said. "Why did you doubt me?" When they climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped. Then the disciples worshipped him. "You really are the Son of God," they exclaimed. Okay, so this is one of the most important passages in the Bible, if nothing else, because of that end. That end is the disciples telling Jesus that he is the Son of God, worshiping him as the Son of God for the first time, at least according to Matthew, and at least as a group. Is that John has a couple of them saying he's the Son of God very early, but as a group, this is the first time we see all the disciples confessing that Jesus is in fact the Son of God. Really, really important passage for that reason. But also, this passage kind of tells us, well, this is not just the story of Jesus walking on water. Right? We've been calling this whole series, we've been talking about the storm, because there's a lot more in this story than just Jesus walking on the water. And really maybe just as famous. Like when I was a kid hearing this story and being raised with this story, being very familiar, I remembered Peter walking on water as much as I remember Jesus walking on water. Like, Peter walking on water seemed a lot more significant because, Jesus is God and Peter's not. So I can assume that, God in the flesh can do things like break the laws of physics, and I don't assume that with Peter. And so the idea is, in this story, we have a whole different miracle. Here is Peter doing something that no one has ever done. No human person who is fully human and not, God in the flesh also has ever walked on water. Like, if you try to walk on water, you're going to fall in. And so it's never happened, and it did, it does. It's an understandable story, too, because we've been talking for the last 3 weeks. The disciples are terrified of this storm. They are terrified of what's going to happen. They're terrified of their boat sinking, of them drowning. You've got this crazy wave and lightning and thunder and rain and everything else. And the boat is not much of a barrier between the disciples and the storm, but it is a barrier. Like, it's better than not a barrier. So for Peter to get out of the boat is to remove any level of potential safety he might feel. right? So that's why it's scary. It's amazing that he walks on the water, but it would be terrifying to go into the eye of something scary like a storm that you're thinking is going to kill you, and to do so without the one thing that is between you and that, the one thing built to keep you safe. That's what a boat is. Right, at the end of the day, a boat is built to keep you safe as you travel the water. That's the whole point of a boat. And so Peter gets out of that. Amazing, beautiful, incredible, cool. Here's my problem. The story, before we get to the Son of God stuff, it ends well, but there's a question I have in between. Peter gets out of the boat. He walks, I don't know, a few steps. It doesn't really say exactly, how much, but he does walk on the water to some degree, and then he falls in. And Jesus says two things to him, two rhetorical questions, or one rhetorical question and one statement, I guess. He says, "You have so little faith, and why did you doubt me?" Now, the problem with this is I don't know the tone with which Jesus spoke. And tone is really, really, really important. This is the flaw with having the Bible as our predominant, source of information about our faith, right? Like, this is the problem. A lot of times Christians will kind of elevate the Bible to like the fourth member of the Trinity. The problem with doing that is stuff like this. The written word can never convey all communication. Here's what I mean. Nobody in this room thinks that when Michael Jackson sang, I'm bad, nobody thinks that he was confessing a deep-seated lack of self-esteem. Nobody thinks that. Nobody heard that song and said, "Oh, Michael, you doing okay, man?" No, we understood from the tone of the song, right, that by I'm bad, that Michael Jackson actually meant I'm good. Right? Like, we get that. And it's because it's not just the written word there. It's the tone is everything. Like this, if you guys have dogs, it's a fun game to play. If you say something to your dogs that's really, really mean, but you say it in a high-pitched voice, and you say it real nice. "Oh, what a terrible dog you are." Here's what your dog is going to do. Your dog is going to listen to your tone and not your words, because they're bad at words. You can say the meanest thing to your dog in a nice way, and their tail will wag, and they'll jump up on you because they think you're praising them. You could also say nice things in a mean tone, but that's going to make your dog sad. Don't do that. Don't you make your dog sad. We don't deserve dogs. They're the best. So again, tone is everything. Okay, so that's dogs. We know this with the languages too, right? Like, again, the tones and the words. If you want something romantic, everything in French sounds romantic, right? Like, they can put snails on a menu and you're like, "Ooh, escargot. That's a great date night." You're eating bugs from the garden, but the language lets you think this is romantic. Or British people, right? British people are I don't want to make fun of British people, but British people sound so fancy with their high and mighty language, the Queen's English. You want to get fancy, give a British accent to anything. Conversely, if we die and go to heaven and God says, "Well done, good and faithful servant," in German, there's going to be a moment of panic for all of us where we're like, "Oh no, I'm going to hell." Because nothing sounds nice in German. Nothing. Anyway, those are my people. I can make fun of the Germans all I want. Everything sounds terrible. Everything sounds mean. Communication is like that. Anybody who's married understands this. Anybody who's had friends, anybody who's ever talked to anybody understands. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. It's at least as important for what you say and how you say it. It's never less important. And so here we have this story where Jesus says, you have so little faith. Why did you doubt me? And this could go one of two ways. Jesus could be saying, why do you doubt me? You have so little faith. And he could be saying that with a smile on his face. He could be saying that while laughing. He could be saying that the way that you rib your best friend. You know, like you're making fun of, you know, everybody dishes it out, everybody takes it. You know, like this is the way it works. Like if you're friends, you can say anything to your friends. I mean, this could be just, you know, a good thing because Peter just did something that no one else has ever done. You know, what an amazing, incredible moment. And Jesus is so happy and he's so proud and this is so cool and it's so great. And Jesus is just saying, man, you could have stayed on the water all day. He could have said it like that. But he also could have said it to the opposite. He could have said, why did you doubt me? With disappointment in his voice. That's the worst. It could be angry, but like, at least for me, like if you're mad at me, that's one thing, but disappointment's a whole other thing. I don't know if y'all are like me. But Jesus, like, it could have been like, why did you doubt me? Why don't you have faith? He could have said it with a frown on his face. He could have said it with concern, like, this is the dude I'm leaving in charge when I'm gone? This guy? They're going to make him the first pope? What a terrible idea. I get a new dude? Anybody? Well, the rest of them stayed in the boat, so maybe not. Like, it could be angry, could be disappointed, could be upset, could be judging. The Bible, the flaw with the Bible is it doesn't tell me. There's no tone here. We just have the words. And I got to tell you, this means everything, at least to me personally. I don't know if y'all are going to connect with all this, but for me personally, this is one of those things. Look, I grew up in the church. I've been around a lot of church people. I don't know if y'all are aware of the way a lot of church people are, but a lot of church people teach Jesus like the second one. Like God is just so disappointed in you all the time. Like you woke up today and now he is grieved by your presence. Like the world would be better if he hadn't have made you, but I guess you're here. Oh, neat, it's Drew, that guy. Like that's how a lot of people, like God is just waiting to be upset with us. Even when we do something so amazing like walking on water, God is still ready to be disappointed. That's the way a lot of folks teach Christianity. That's the way a lot of people describe God as being. And I don't want that. I'll be honest. Like life is hard enough. One of my favorite theologians talks a lot about, you know, choosing the better story. One of the things he talks about is, look, if you don't know, then there's nothing binding you to anything. You might as well choose the better one. Because if the other one's wrong, right, then it's not like you knew that anyway. If you got two options and neither one of them you could prove, you might as well be happy while you do it. And I think there's a lot of wisdom there. I can't prove how Jesus said that, but I can tell you I really want Jesus to have said it nicely. And so I'm just going to be totally upfront with you guys. I'm just going to try to justify that Jesus was nice. I don't know if that's responsible. I'm pretty sure going back to Bible college, they were like, this isn't how you preach a sermon. Shut up. This is what I'm doing. Because this is important. Okay? We have to have we have to have some sort of an understanding because it's so, life is so hard. And being a Christian is so hard. Do you guys realize, we all believe in a being that we can't see? Do we think about that? There's no proof that God's real. I know we were all taught that there is. There's not. There's a lot of wishful thinking. I tell you there's a lot of good evidence, but proof is a whole other thing. Proof is that's a whole different conversation. Being a Christian is hard, and it's somewhat trendy. I don't know how plugged into the Christian world you are, but it is very trendy now for people who've been Christians their whole lives to be like, you know what I'm going to do? Stop believing in Jesus. I'm going to call that deconstruction. I'm going to do that because I don't know if you ever heard that. It makes them feel it makes them sound super intelligent. And all it really means is I'm finding reasons not to believe in Jesus anymore. for most people. That was judgy. Anyway, I'm just saying it's hard, right? Christianity is hard enough without thinking that God's out to get you all the time. So let's see if we can explore a world where maybe we can find that some good evidence that Jesus is not out to get us and God is not out to get us. And to do that, let's turn our attention to the last night that Jesus had with his disciples, the Last Supper. Here's why that's a really good place to go, okay? The Last Supper is the last night that Jesus is with his disciples, but it's also the night he gets arrested. They have dinner, and then Jesus gets arrested that night. Meaning, if Jesus was ever going to be short with his disciples because he was stressed out, it would be the night he's getting arrested. If Jesus was ever just so stressed out that he just, the veneer comes down and his true feelings come out, right? Because you can fake it. Like, we all have those people in our lives that, like, you're good at faking it. Like, yeah, we're totally best friends. But, like, really, like, when they text, you're like, ugh. Or people at work, you're like, oh, yeah, I love this coworker. And secretly, you're like, I wish they'd get a better job. Like, you could fake it. If Jesus was going to fake it and then the veneer would come, like, it would be the night he is so stressed out because he's going to get arrested. So let's look at the things Jesus says to his disciples at his Last Supper. We're going to look at 3. Here we go. The first one is in John chapter 13. This is what we read. Jesus at the Last Supper, he tells his disciples this. He says, now I am giving you a new commandment. Love each other just as I have loved you. You should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. We've all heard that passage. It's a nice one, but it's actually lacking in context by itself. Right? By itself, if Jesus says, hey, love people the way I loved you, and he loved them poorly, he could be saying, treat people terribly as I have treated you, if we have no context. But luckily, we have context. What Jesus is referring to here, the immediate context, is Jesus washing his disciples' feet. And I'll be honest, before the Super Bowl, I thought Christians just understood that, like what the washing of the feet was. And then there's this commercial about Jesus washing people's feet during the Super Bowl, and the internet explodes with people being like, I don't understand that at all. And Christians being like, yeah, it is a little weird. Okay, so let's talk about why Jesus washes people's feet so we're not those people. Cool? Cool. So, in the ancient world, they didn't have cars. Super easy point to remember. Didn't have cars. And most people didn't have money for, like, animals to ride on. I mean, it was sort of impractical to do that, right? And so the way people in the ancient world traveled was they walked. Also, Nike was not yet in business. Again, I know it's hard, but we can remember that Nike was not in business. So they didn't have, like, shoes the way we think of shoes. They had sandals, which means most of their feet were uncovered as they walked on the road. Which means as they walked on the road, they were very liable to be very, very dirty. This is the Middle East, okay? There's a lot of sand, a lot of dirt, a lot of dust. It's just kind of the way that it is. So in the ancient world, if you were going to somebody's house, you were walking there, and your feet would be filthy when you got there. So what would happen is in every home, there would be a bowl of water by the door, and you could wash your feet. In homes where the people, had a little bit more money, or they had, they would just whatever, they would have a person there who would wash your feet. The problem is no one in this room wants to wash their own feet, much less other people's. And nobody wants to wash people's feet when they've been walking for miles and miles and miles in the sand and the dust and the dirt, because that's disgusting. So they would make slaves do it, because a slave, by definition, doesn't have the ability to say, no, thank you, I'd like to not do that job. So this is just normal. I know we don't like things like the reality that every culture forever until a couple hundred years ago had slaves, and we don't like that, but they did, and so they were slaves in the ancient world, and they all had them, and here we go. So the Last Supper, they all get there, and there is not a slave there. There is not anybody to wash his feet. They were, I suppose, expected to just do it themselves the way everybody else did, usually. But Jesus decides to wash his disciples' feet for them. This communicates two things. The first thing it communicates is Jesus' deep love for his disciples. Because let me tell you, the disciples were disgusting. They just were. These are blue-collar men who sweat, who are, we understand the disciples are generally teenagers. Y'all ever been around a teenager who hasn't showered? Like a 16, 17-year-old, 18-year-old in that neighborhood hadn't showered in a few days? It's just indescribable. And now there's a dozen of them, right? And so Jesus, he washes their feet to show them his love and his devotion to them. That's only the first part, though. The second part is, remember who I just said generally does this? Slaves. Jesus does the job of a slave, which is another way of saying Jesus did not think he was too good to do the job of a slave. Jesus did not think that he was the kind of person that could avoid the worst jobs in the room. He did the worst job in the room. And that tells us so much about the way that God views humanity. This is the very bottom rung of the social ladder, a rung that we have decided is so low we don't have it. Like, think about how low on the social ladder slaves have to be when we just said we're going to cut that rung off. Because it's so bad, it's so terrible, we don't think slaves should exist. That's how low they were. And Jesus says, I am totally cool being one of those. Jesus identifies with slaves, in solidarity with slaves. Jesus sees the value and the worth and the dignity of slaves, which is another way of saying Jesus sees the value and the worth and the dignity of all of humanity. When Jesus says, love each other just as I have loved you, what he's saying is, I want you to love unconditionally and universally, even when they smell terrible, and even when they are at the very, very bottom of the social ladder. Unconditional love and universal love. That is what the washing of the feet is Jesus communicating unconditional and universal love. And then he tells his disciples, I want you all to do that. The way that I have loved you guys, I want you to do that for other people. This is at the core of who Jesus is. Unconditional and universal love. Okay, next. As the evening continues, they continue to eat and do their thing. Jesus then tells them this. It's going to be in John chapter 14. We're going to jump from one to the end. We'll cover what's in between here in a second. Here we go. It says, do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God and trust also in me. A little bit later, he says, I am leaving you with a gift, peace of mind and heart. The peace I give is a gift the world cannot give. So don't be troubled or afraid. So just off the top, without context, don't be troubled, don't be afraid, you can trust me, I'm giving you peace. All of that's great. But when we understand the context of what he's getting at, it becomes even more beautiful. Because you see, what Jesus tells them is, don't be afraid, don't be troubled, because what I'm going to do is save you. He words it like this. He says, I'm going to go build a house for you. My Father's home has a bunch of rooms, way more rooms than he knows what to do with. I'm going to go set one up for you. And that's important because Jesus is going to get killed. And the disciples, Jesus says, y'all are going to get killed too. Nobody ever says don't be afraid unless there's a good reason to be afraid. It's the dirty secret of the things we say to people. Oh, don't worry. Every time somebody said don't worry, what they're communicating to you is there's a reason to worry, and I'd like you to ignore that. They say, I've got anxiety. Anyway, so Jesus says don't be afraid, and there's a reason to be afraid. They're going to all get killed too. All of the apostles are going to be dead, other than John, who's going to live in exile. That's not better, by the way. Everybody, they're all, and so it's scary, it's terrifying. And so what Jesus says is, look, I need you to understand how this ends. You're about to start on a journey. I'm going to be gone, and you guys have got to walk a road. The end of that road is me saving you. The end of that road is when you are no longer in this life, you will be with God in the next life. Okay? Now, I can't tell you what's between point A and point B. I can't. I can't do that for lots of reasons, philosophical ones. But I'm telling you, it ends well. That is what he's saying when he says, I'm going to give you a peace of mind. When you know the ending, right? It's sort of like you're watching a movie and it's super stressful, right? If you know the ending, it's a lot less stressful. Like if you know at the end that every time the Empire builds a Death Star, it's just going to get blown up. You're not going to freak out when they build another Death Star. Right? Even when they do it in the next movie and they're just like, we're going to lift this idea from the last one. Not going to write a new movie, just going to write the old one again. But we don't have to worry because we know how it ends, right? It's how it ends. If we know how this ends, the end of this life, we are with God in the next life. Then that's a piece that nothing on the interim can take away. No matter how bad this road gets, no matter how difficult the journey, it always is going to land in the same place. That's why, by the way, Jesus says, the peace I give you, no one else can give. Right? That's why he says the world can't give you, because there's nothing in this world that can save us. There's no one in this world that can save us but Christ. And so Jesus is saying, I'm the only one that's going to save you. I'm the only one that can save you. So I am saving you. So you know I'm giving you this. Nobody else has it. But at the end, the bottom line is it's going to be okay in the end. Okay. One more. Fast forward a little bit more. As we read, finally in John 16, he says, I tell you the truth. You will weep and mourn over what is going to happen to me, but the world will rejoice. You will grieve, but your grief will suddenly turn to wonderful joy. It will be like a woman suffering the pains of labor. When her child is born, her anguish gives way to joy because she has brought a new baby into the world. So you have sorrow now, but I will see you again. Then you will rejoice, and no one can rob you of that joy. At that time, you won't need to ask me for anything. I tell you the truth. You will ask the Father directly, and he will grant your request because you use my name. You haven't done that before. Ask using my name, and you will receive, and you will have abundant joy. Okay. I love this for two reasons. The first one, that's a fantastic illustration. Like, I understand, like, he's God in the flesh. But, like, as illustrations go, like, I liked that Michael Jackson one earlier. I did. I was really proud of that one. I thought about that one on Monday. I was like, I got to shoehorn this in here somewhere. And then I wrote the sermon, and it wasn't in there, and I was like, Michael Jackson. And I went back, and I tried to find a place to shoehorn it. Yeah, that's what I tried to do. I love a good illustration. And the illustration of a woman giving birth is just so beautiful. Because, yeah, I'm not a woman, but I'm also not an idiot. That's painful. That's unpleasant. And let's also remember, Jesus is speaking about this in a world without drugs. So that's unfortunate. That's bad. But also, I've never met a mom who, when she gives birth, is like, yeah, it's fine. Like, every mom is like, look at my baby. He's perfect. That's the tone you use with your dogs. That's it. Like, they're always so stoked about their perfect baby. Right? Because it's the greatest moment of ever because you just like made a baby and brought it into the world. Like, it's incredible. Jesus talks about that as the illustration. That's the kind of shift that happens. And I love the fact, the second thing I love about this is how vague it is. If you look at this passage and you try to say, well, what is Jesus talking about? When does our mourning turn into joy? It sure sounds like the resurrection. Right? Like, he says, I'll come back and you'll do. It also, like, a lot of folks are like, this is the second coming of Jesus. Well, that sort of sounds like that, too, if I'm being honest. It also, I think, just sort of sounds like everyday life. He's just literally talking about praying. If this is the resurrection, like, if this is the resurrection, it's not, like, you don't start praying as soon as they meet Jesus, like they hang out with Jesus. If it's a second coming, like, we don't really need to pray at that point. This is a passage that really speaks to kind of everyday life. And so what we learn is that God is in the business of taking terrible things and making them good. Taking horrible pain and making them joyful. Taking things that we struggle with and making them strengths. teaching us through all of the journey, right? Like, this is what we're learning is that that's the sort of God he is. And he is that now. He's that in the future. He's that backwards. This is just who God is. If we put these things together, like I said, tone is as important as words. It is. But there are some words that tone can't fix, change. Like, there's certain things that if I tell you, it doesn't really matter what my tone is, right? If I say, I'm bringing you peace, I'm bringing you love, I'm going to bring you joy. Like, assuming Jesus wasn't just being sarcastic this whole night and lying to them and being like, gotcha, just kidding, I hate you all. And that seems like not a thing he'd be doing, given that he's dying for them in 20 minutes. There's no tone that can change what we're reading here. That Jesus has loved his disciples and he wants them to love other people in return. That Jesus has brought them peace and salvation, and therefore they don't have to be anxious and they don't have to be afraid. That in the resurrection, in the next life, in the life here, always and forever, forwards and backwards, that God is a God who turns bad things into good things. I dare say that if this is Jesus, that is very good news, because also at dinner, Jesus lays out for his disciples the most important principle we can ever have as Christians. Principle that I'm just going to keep shouting from the rooftops as much as I possibly can. Jesus is the way, he is the truth, and he is the life. And what that means is that if we want to know who God is, we look at Jesus. And if we want to know what God does, we look at Jesus. And if we want to know what God would never do, you look at Jesus. And if you wonder what Jesus might say to you, or what God might say to you, you look at Jesus. Jesus is the one who communicates to us who God is. And he told them that at an evening where he promised them peace and salvation and love and joy. There is no tone that can undo those things. And so now we come back to our original conversation. Assuming that Jesus is the same Jesus in both stories, I find it unfathomable that Jesus was angry with Peter. On its face, I find the whole thing absurd. Because here's Peter, and Peter's trying. Did he succeed? Yeah, he did. Was that success short-lived? You betcha. Like, no question about it. Did he then ultimately fail? Yeah. You know what that makes Peter? A person. It makes him us. It makes him me and you. We try. And very often we succeed. And very often we fail. And very often our success leads to our failure. And very often our failure leads to our success. The important thing to understand here is, at the end of the day, we do not serve a God who is disappointed at us, with us when we try. We do not serve a God who is angry that we made the attempt. We don't serve a God who's sitting around just counting all the things we do wrong and saying, man, what a mess up. I never should have made that, dude. Did you see what she did yesterday? Classic. She's always like that. Like, how catty and petty would the creator of reality be? To sit around with the angels and be like, did you see what Drew said? I mean, I made him that way. I get it, but... And I know he says stupid stuff all the time. But did you hear that? Even by his standards, it's awful. That's not God. That's a voice in our head that's lying to us. And sometimes that voice in our head that's lying to us gets out of our head and it ends up in the voices of other people who are well-meaning, who are Christians, who are preachers, who are teachers, who try to instill in us a sense to be good Christians, and instead they just make us want to do the opposite. The good news of the gospel is this: we never had to do this on our own. Remember Jesus saying, the world cannot give this peace. Only I can give you this peace. The world cannot save you. Only I can save you. And so it's not up to us to save ourselves. It's not up to us to create any of this on our own. It's up to us to place our hope and our faith and our trust in a God who loves us far greater than we could possibly understand. Far greater than every mom with her perfect baby. Far greater than anything we can conceive of. God loves us in a way that we simply cannot understand. All we can try to do is appreciate it and then share it. This morning, we're on our fourth week of our series called The Storm. We've been talking, I love this story because there's so much going on. We've talked about all the different things. We talked about Jesus with all the miracles. We talked about the ghost thing. That was fun. We all had a good time with that one. We talked about the fact that Jesus sent them into the storm because he wanted them to be in this difficult situation. We talked about a lot of stuff. I've been happy with this. This is good. It's basically just 4 weeks of the same sermon. I'm so happy that we've done this. Stephanie's not so sure. She giggles in the back. But I'm so glad that we're doing this. And our last week, as we talk about Peter, and more importantly, we talk about Jesus' response to Peter, we learn this lesson. Our fourth and final lesson from the storm is this. God isn't angry with us when we fall. God is there to help us get back up. God is not angry with us when we fall. God is there to help us get back up. We offer an invitation each and every week. Take God up on his offer of his love and grace and his mercy. The Bible teaches when we understand who God is, we are to repent and be baptized. It sounds like two things. It is really just one. In repentance, we say, I want to change. I want things the way God has them. I don't want things the way that I have them. I want things the way God has them. I don't want my life without God. I want my life with God. And in baptism, we join ourselves to Christ. Just as he was dead, buried, and raised, we symbolically are dead, buried, and raised. And we are saying to God, I want my future, my present, and my everything to be connected to with Jesus as I follow him and I accept his spirit and his forgiveness and his love for me. If you've never made that decision, we got a nice warm basket this morning. Let's talk. If you're an immersed believer in Christ, looking for a perfect church home, it is not here. But we do serve a perfect God. We want to connect, we want to call, we want to cultivate, we want to meet new people, we want to share the gospel, we want to grow up, but we do it, and we want, more than anything else, for us to see God the way that Christ shows us. As we stand, also the musicians come forward, as we stand,